Brightness Long Ago is a 2019 fantasy novel by Gavriel that won the 2020 Locus Award. So what makes this book a winner? Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, your spoiler-free one-stop shop for all things audiobook. A Brightness Long Ago by Gavriel is a really fascinating story about our narrator, Danio Serra, recounting the events of his life. He's not a man of means, but often he finds himself in extraordinary company, like that of kings. In the novel, he's reflecting on the pivotal decisions that have led his life to this point. Danio is a young man with no lineage and no inheritance, and essentially he's nobody. But he makes a decision one evening to help a young woman who is escaping from a crime that she's committed. And this decision puts the rest of the events of his life in motion in a way he could never anticipate. This simple decision leaves him forever changed, and that's what this story is about. Danio does come from excellent academic tutelage and strong combat training because he's fortunate enough to win a sort of lottery that entitles those who don't have means to the best schooling possible. So he's aware of that grace and that fortune that he's had, and with that, he still goes through life feeling like he's constantly somewhere he shouldn't be. He spends much of the novel reflecting on decision-making and what was versus what might have been. And the way that he reflects is really rather philosophical. In fact, it made me think about some of those moments in my life that I would consider life-altering, but I didn't know that at the time. He reflects on the fact that humans are unique in that we are very likely the only species that really thinks about what could have been, not just what was. I found the book to be really philosophical. Kay's writing is not unsophisticated and it's not childlike, yet there's something about this story and the way that it's told that feels a little bit like you're hearing a story told to you as a child. Simon Vance, the narrator, does an amazing job of making you feel like he's a friend. Now, I previously listened to Simon Vance in both Northwoods and Dune, and I think he's a really versatile narrator. I enjoyed the way that he made me feel like I knew Danio, and Danio was a friend of mine by the end of the story. I really felt like I was a child having a grandparent tell me a story in my bedroom before I go to sleep, or maybe a long-lost relative who comes back to town with this extraordinary tale. It was really moving, and it was really captivating. I thought all of the characters in the story were well developed. Danio is interesting in that he's not an important man, yet he keeps finding himself adjacent to or directly involved with really important situations. He's reflecting on this later in life in the story, so it's interesting how he's sort of our first-person narrator, but also our eyes and ears as the reader or listener. It's interesting to hear a character have judgment about their own actions and talk through what they think about how things went. You don't usually get that in a story, but this reminiscence really works well for that. There are many characters that he's around who are quite high status, and we really get his unusually neutral view of them. And then there are characters who are maybe more what you would consider minor, yet for Danio they're important. And I love the way Kay represents that importance throughout the story from Danio's perspective. One of the ways that he did this was to create intense and memorable scenes that involve things that were important to Danio, although they may not have been critical to the story. Or if they are, they're less critical than Danio makes them out to be, but it's clear that they're core memories for him. Without spoiling anything, one of the moments I'm talking about specifically, which you'll know if you've read the book, and if you haven't, this isn't going to mean anything to you, but there's a scene in which a horse race takes place. Now, in the audiobook, that scene was well over an hour, and I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. Now, it was partially the events that were described, but it was also the significance of it to Danio as the narrator, so hearing him reflect on this really pivotal moment for him was fascinating, even if it wasn't a really pivotal moment for everyone else in that world. The decision to spend so much time on this exemplifies Kay's keen ability to build out a character's world by showing us really specifically what's important to them. There was a familiarity to the storytelling that even though this is not a world that I live in or one that I've ever visited, I felt like I knew these people. Simon Vance definitely helped with that, but this book for me was so deeply philosophical and also just wholesome storytelling that I really loved it. I gave this book a 4.5 overall, and I felt like I breezed through it, even though it was on the lengthier side. This story's power lies in the way that it shows us how the choices we make shape our lives, but not just the choices we make, also how we remember and reinterpret them over time, and that can change for people as they grow older. Sometimes the act of remembering is as transformative as the decision itself, and our interpretations can morph over time. We can live what was to the best of our memory, but we can also live what wasn't over and over again and play out those situations in our head. Danio is plagued by some of the decisions that he's made throughout his life. As an older man, you're hearing him reflect on how each decision changed him and what he might have done differently and how that might have affected him too. Now, you might notice I haven't said a whole lot about the plot of this book, and that's very much on purpose. If you're interested in deep diving into a story that's about memory and recollection and philosophy, but also a really fun story, it reminds me a little bit of The Princess Bride or Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. The story itself is really epic, but I kind of can't tell you about it without telling you exactly what happens, and as weird as this may sound, what happens in the story isn't the point of the story. The way that what happens impacts Danio Serra is what ends up being most important in this story. I think if you love fantasy or you love long sweeping epics, Guy Gavriel Kay's A Brightness Long Ago is an absolute winner. I loved his writing and I will definitely be seeking out some of his other stories. But remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love, so make your own opinion. But thanks for listening to mine.